একটু পাঠ আছে গানের, এটার পরে বন্ধ করে দেবো। শুক্রবার তো আজকে, আজকে শুক্রবার তো।
जान विमल नयन विषाने मोह যায় ভাষার ভাব সাগর চির উন্মাদ প্রেম পাথার ভক্তার জান যুগল চরণ ভক্তার জান যুগল চরণ তারণ ভব রেম ভেদ যুগ এষার জগ দেশার যোগ সাহার এর ধান সমাহিত মান নির ধান সমাহিত মান নিরখে তব কৃপা ভঞ্জন দুঃখ গঞ্জন করো নাগন কর্ম কত প্রাণ পান জগত তারণ প্রাণ পান জগত তারণ চিন্তন করে বাঞ্ছন কাম কাঞ্চন অতি নিন্দিত ইন্দ্রিয় ত্যাগে সার হে নার বার ত্যাগে সার হে নার বার দেহ পাদে নির্ভয় গাত সংশয় जग जल दुख जाय नमो नमो प्रभु बाकमनातीत नमो नमो प्रभु बाकमनातीत मन वचन आधार प्रभु मन वचन आधार ज्योतिर ज्योति उजल रिधि कंदर ज्योतिर ज्योति उजल रिधि कंदर तुमी तम भंजनहार प्रभु तुमी तम भंजनहार नमो नमो प्रभु बाकमनातीत नमो नमो प्रभु बाकमनातीत मन वचन एकाधार प्रभु मन वचन एकाधार ज्योतिर ज्योति उजल रिधि कंदर ज्योतिर ज्योति उजल रिधि कंदर तुमी तम भंजनहार प्रभु तुमी तम भंजनहार दे 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 लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंग संग मृदंग दे 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 लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंग संग मृदंग गाइছে ছন্দ বকত বৃন্দ আরতি তোমার গাইছে ছন্দ বকত বৃন্দ আরতি তোমার জয় জয় আরতি তোমার হর হর আরতি তোমার শিব শিব আরতি তোমার খণ্ডন বন্ধন জগ বন্দন বন্দিত মায় জয় শ্রী গুরু মহারাজ কি জয়। ॐ ह्रीं ऋतं तमचलो गुणजित गुणेभ्यः नाक्तां तेवं सकरुणं तव पादपद्मं मोहं कषं बहुकृतं न भजे जातोऽहं तस्मात्तमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो भक्तिर्भगवंश्च भजनं भवभेदकारे गच्छन्तलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तात्वं वक्रोद्धृतोऽपि हृदये न मे भाति किञ्चित् तस्मात्तमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो तेजस्तरन्ति तरसा त्वयि तृप्ततृष्णा रागे कृते ऋतपथे त्वयि रामकृष्णे मार्तामृतं तव पदं मरणोर्विनाशं तस्मात्तमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो कृत्यं करोति कलुषं कुहकान्तकारि स्नान्तं शिवं सुविमलं तव नामो नाथ यस्मादहं त्वा স্মরণ জগদেকগম্য তস্মাত্ত্বমেব শরণং মম দীনবন্ধো ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ नमो श्रीभगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्रीभगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्रीभगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। सर्वमङ्गल मङ्गले शिवे सर्वार्थसाधिके शरण्ये त्र्यम्बके गौरी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। सृष्टिस्थिति विनाशानां शक्तिभूते सनातने गुणाश्रये गुणमये नारायणी नमोस्तुते। शरणागत दीनार्त परित्राण परायणे सर्वस्यार्थे हरे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। जय 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 महामाई की जय। जय भगवान श्री रामकृष्ण देव की जय। जय स्वामी जी महाराज जी की जय।
Hello, check. Namashri Atirajaya Vivekananda Sure Satchit Sukhaswarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. So the first line of the paragraph that we shall start with today is the central conclusion of this whole lecture. Yeah? He says, thus we find that Maya is not a theory for the explanation of the world. It has no explanatory content. Okay? So don't think of it in terms of doctrines or anything like that. It is just a word. We have said this several times. Here he spells it out. Maya is not a theory for the explanation of the world. It is not an explanation. This is a fundamental point to be grasped. And what is it then? It is simply a statement of facts as they exist. And what is that fact that one is drawing? So if anything, if it has something to contribute, it is drawing one's attention to a particular existential fact. What is that? That the very basis of our being is contradiction. That everywhere we have to move through this tremendous contradiction, that wherever there is good, there must also be evil, and wherever there is evil, there must be some good. Wherever there is life, death must follow as its shadow, and everyone who smiles will have to weep, and vice versa. Nor can this state of things be remedied. We may verily imagine that there will be a place where there will be only good and no evil, where we shall only smile and never weep. This is impossible in the very nature of things. So the focus here is on the nature of things, way things exist. For the conditions will remain the same. Wherever there is the power of producing a smile in us, there lurks the power of producing tears. Wherever there is the power of producing happiness, there lurks somewhere the power of making us miserable. I think this particular paragraph in this whole lecture is really the central point. The previous examples were illustrating this contradictory nature of our existence. But they are contradictory from what point of view? What it is saying is something about our subjective existence. And that our subjective existence is fraught with these positives and negatives. Hence you have optimism and pessimism. Hence you have good and bad. But does this good and bad exist intrinsically? Something just is. Let me try to read out from a completely different source which basically says that science does not ask you whether something is good or bad, but rather how it is. Yeah, this is some ancient statement that was there. And really today in our human activities, it is the pursuit of science really that brings us very close to what is being tried to, what one is trying to say here, what one is trying to understand here. Essentially, not understand the world in terms of what we would like it to be or what we would dislike it to be, but purely in its own terms, intrinsically. Yeah? without the coloration of our values. This is what one is required to do. And in order to get to that, the fundamental qualities of the mind that are necessary are A, discrimination or analysis on the one hand, and detachment. So being able to see this from a non-personal perspective. See, and this particular way of looking at things somehow or the other brings to us great good. Why? Because it brings to us knowledge of things with great clarity. That is what gives rise to power. And if one is inclined to use it for good, then that subjective aspect comes in and would lead that powerful thing called knowledge towards some kind of good or benefit to a larger number of people. But in itself, knowledge is knowledge of a thing, of how it exists. In itself has nothing to do with good or bad. This particular kind of perspective, a detached or more impersonal perspective of the way we look at life and the world, is an essential part of the training of the mind that Vedanta or Buddhism, these basically inculcate in you. In human pursuits, so-called secular human pursuits today, I think the pursuit that drives this particular perspective in most is the pursuit of science. Something is true or false not because you like it to be true or false. Something is true or false because it is so. It is its intrinsic nature to be so. That's the perspective towards which we are expected to evolve our minds. Where we are able to accept things as they are. This is really the starting point. In other words, what you're doing is you're collecting data without prejudice, without bias. And the more precise and unconditioned the mind, the better the data gathering. Today we live in a world of narratives, stories, political narratives, religious narratives, which cover up facts, which cover up what things are in themselves. Whereas here, what we are expected to get to with this faculty of discrimination and dispassion is the core truth. The supreme value that reigns here is truth and nothing else. Not personal predilections, not what one would like or dislike, but what things are in themselves, which is what we in our day-to-day life call truth. And so, if you now try to develop the same kind of detached perspective towards your own feelings, what will happen? You will see that the same thing sometimes causes a pleasant sensation, which we call happiness, sometimes causes an unpleasant sensation, which we call unhappiness or sorrow. Which means that we will be able to treat our mental quirks, these throwing up of emotions, from a more detached perspective. In other words, this internal laboratory, the psychophysical system with which we are born and identify and decide that this is what defines us, our likes and dislikes. Somebody likes ice cream, somebody likes say, lassi. These are just likes and dislikes. It does not say what something is intrinsically. Here, the pursuit is such that it gives less value to your personal likes and dislikes and tries to get at the core of things. What, in this particular case, what? You have ice cream, you put something in your tongue, then there's some salivation, then there are some nerves which basically carry that stimulus to your brain, and then your brain responds to it by emitting certain chemicals, yeah? And essentially, at the end of the day, these heighten your mood. If this is a scientific explanation, but can one study? So this is not going to be, this heightening of the mood is mapped purely into some chemical balances or imbalances in the system. Now the question is, can one do the same kind of scientific detached study when studying studying oneself from a purely detached subjective point of view? In terms, basically what we call subjective phenomena, likes, dislikes, pleasant sensations, unpleasant sensations, what we basically regard as our subjective experience, can that too be analyzed with this detached perspective? And that cultivation of that particular detached perspective is really what Vedanta teaches. In other words, the science of the inner being of an individual is really at the core of this study. Typically, we usually think that science is something that studies something outside. Why can't we bring that same perspective into our personal lives? They can be personal, but we can have a detached, impersonal perspective towards what other people, or what we typically call our personal experiences. In other words, this mind-body complex with which we move around and with which we are all the time can be treated in the sense of a laboratory in which we understand how our subjective experiences work. More succinctly, how our mind works. Essentially, therefore, the aim is really at how does this individual mind work? Getting at an in-depth understanding of this laboratory, which we call our psyche, which is available to us for free. Can we bring the same kind of scientific temper, the same kind of objective, detached attitude to bear on it? So the aim then is to gain knowledge. This is how my mind behaves when there is such and such a sensation. This is how it behaves when there is this kind of opposite sensation. And this study of our whole psychophysical experience, whole subjective experience from a detached perspective is in the Upanishads, the Mundaka Upanishad. It's called Jnana Tapas. Yeah, in the Bhagavad Gita also says, Bahavo Jnana Tapasa Puta. Bahavo means many. Jnana Tapasa. Through this tapas of knowledge. Jnana Tapas is the tapas of knowledge. Yeah? Jnana Tapasa is Tritiya. By means of this Jnana Tapas. Puta. They have become pure. Pure means what? The prejudices and the petty things which bind us down are gone. This is exactly what purification of the mind is about. To be able to treat the psychophysical organism with detachment. Not getting thrown into waves, but holding oneself aloof and seeing. So, for example, here is a very simple example. Suppose there's some physical pain. can we treat this as just some kind of sensation that is going on in our body? Can we treat it with that detached perspective? It's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen in a day. But these are little things that can be cultivated. So, for example, somebody comes and says something nasty to me. I immediately become angry. What about, at that point, detaching and seeing those words for what it is? These are some bunch of symbols which are supposed to evoke an emotional response. There's a stimulus in terms of some words. There's supposed to be an expected response in terms of an emotion. Can one see this whole complex from outside, as it were? Suppose somebody came and used some words to me in a language I don't know, say Hungarian. Would I feel offended? No. So then, it's not the words themselves that carry this power of an emotional response. It is my mind that interprets and then tells me that, look, I ought to get angry with this. In other words, I myself have basically conditioned myself to respond to certain stimuli in certain ways. The deconditioning of the mind is exactly what is gunned for here. This is the development of detachment or dispassion. It does not mean you become inert. Quite the opposite. It means you become very alert, very conscious. Yeah? In a different place, and this is not supposed to be done only when you're sitting in some quiet posture, etc., etc. It's while going through our day-to-day grind, our day-to-day life, that we are supposed to cultivate this particular attitude of the mind. In other words, somebody says something to us, could be pleasant, could be unpleasant. At the same time, which means basically the emotional binding to the body, that is our immediate response, is expected to be curtailed. That is what helps us. That helps us even thinking about it. There's a stimulus and there's a response. One of our erstwhile presidents, Swami Ranganathananda, used to say, between the impulse and the response, insert a little bit of thought. In other words, make that part of the mind which responds mechanically conscious. It does not require for you to believe in any doctrine, in any dogma, in any church. These are superfluous. In a different place, Vivekananda has said, this doctrines, dogmas, churches, temples, all these are secondary details. It is, so for example, everybody knows that if you really want to pursue, say, some knowledge in a particular subject, you sit and cogitate and the knowledge comes. The thing is, certain atmospheres are conducive to that. But the knowledge has to be sparked within. No amount of external stimuli, mechanical atmosphere is going to definitively evoke a response. It is the conscious mind that responds, that tries to capture in this extraneous circumstances a unifying piece of knowledge. So, in a sense, this flash of knowledge is an illustration of our innate freedom, our innate capacity to understand the world and be outside of it. The flash of knowledge at every instant. The fact that I'm sitting in this room thinking consciously or unconsciously as of this whole room as one integral whole, and there's a whole bunch of processes going on inside me which basically tell me that this room is not going to suddenly convert itself into say, a three-legged elephant, right? I mean, these are sort of all kinds of ridiculous things which we could imagine. None of those things are going to happen right now. Yeah? This is, so basically this mind is constantly living at this level of awareness, but perhaps unconsciously. The only point that is being driven home here is make that conscious. If we try to analyze our subjective life in terms of personal likes and dislikes, in terms of human values, what is just, what is unjust, what is true, what is good, what is bad, then we will be caught in that. And there will be no resolution. Yeah? This is one of the things that he says here in this paragraph. Nor can this state of things be remedied. If you start thinking that, no, I'm going to make the whole world a good place, it's never going to happen. It's not in the nature of things to happen, because good is a very subjectively defined condition. And a subjectively defined condition cannot be imposed on an objective reality and convert this much larger objective reality to that subjective condition. This is the reason why all dictators, why all people who have been authoritarian have failed in the end. Why? Because they have tried to subject their individual will rather than present something which is true. And once something is true, the human mind has a natural tendency to grasp it. Authority is not a good enough. It can drive people out of fear, but it will not lead to an acceptance of something as true. Whereas the description of truth might fall upon deaf ears. In a different place, Vivekananda says, I shall compare truth to a hard, corrosive substance of infinite strength that corrodes its way, that eats its way into things, into soft substance at once, into hard things slowly, but it must. And so the objective really is the pursuit of truth, not what we like, not what we dislike. What are things as they are? This is the point. I mean, in the Vedanta literature, this is what is called Vyavaharika Satya. Yeah? Not Pratibhasika. Pratibhasika is things as they appear. When I say I like something, suppose I have eaten a huge amount of ice cream. I see a little bit of ice cream, I feel sick. I don't want to eat it. The same ice cream is going to, if I am hungry and I feel like having something sweet, that same thing is going to evoke a pleasant response. So the response that is elicited subjectively is not in the object. It is the conditions that we have imposed on ourselves that bring those stimuli out. So likes and dislikes are a very, very poor method of determining reality. Our emotions are a terrible way of determining what is true, what is false. They can give rise to violence, they can give rise to killing, they might also give rise to very great things. But there is no reliability. If the same feelings are driven by truth, a calm conviction on something that is true, that goes much further. That's, I think, the content. This is the subjective lesson that we need to learn from this analysis. We think that, oh, so-and-so has behaved badly to me, so-and-so I am going through this kind of suffering, or I am going to get this tomorrow and I'll be full of joy, etc., etc. These are only things which can affect us so long as we are not aware of how they affect us. The aim of Vedanta really then is to be free of these conditionings of the mind. We hear various words, various theologies, various stories of what freedom means. This is what it means. It's here, it's now. It's not some post-mortem experience. It's not something mystical. It is starting with our day-to-day existence, taking that as data, understanding it objectively, analyzing it, and extracting knowledge from it. Let's proceed a little more and then we'll stop. Thus, the Vedanta philosophy is neither optimistic nor pessimistic. It voices both these views and takes things as they are. Takes things as they are. Again, see the emphasis, not on what is good, what is bad, what I like, what I dislike, but as they are. What does it mean, taking things as they are? It means conditioning the mind to be sensitive to the truth, sensitive to what things are in themselves, not in terms of my likes and dislikes. The whole objective then is to move one's mind so that it sees things clearly. This clarity of the mind is what one is aiming for. It admits that this world is a mixture of good and evil, happiness and misery, and that to increase the one must of necessity increase the other. There will never be a perfectly good or bad world because the very idea is a contradiction in terms. Here is, I think these two paragraphs, he sort of gives the gist of the whole thing. You can't hope for, it's a very puerile, very childish, very juvenile idea to expect that there will only be good and no bad in one's life. The mature thing is to treat good and bad as part and parcel of this existence. The great secret revealed by this analysis is that good and bad are not two cut and dried separate existences. In other words, just as we were illustrating, something evokes a pleasant sensation, the same thing, the same ice cream evokes an unpleasant sensation when I am full. It basically says there is no intrinsic good, there is no intrinsic bad. These are no two cut and dried separate existences. There is not one thing in this world of ours which you can label as good and good alone. And there is not one thing in the universe which you can label as bad and bad alone. The very same phenomenon which is appearing to be good now may appear to be bad tomorrow. The same thing which is producing misery in one may produce happiness in another. The fire that burns the child may cook a good meal for a starving man. This is really the perspective that we are trying to get at. Fire in itself is neither good nor bad. When it fulfills some purpose that we feel should, that some subjective purpose is fulfilled by it, we call it good. When some subjective purpose is thwarted by it, we call it bad. It is we who impute goodness or badness to fire. And here then, what are we supposed to do? To sort of go behind this impulse to impute good or bad to something that is happening outside. Yeah? Go behind that aspect, that facet of the mind which keeps jumping between this value-laden way of looking at things. This is not a way to handle life maturely. Keeps going on increasing our fluctuations in the mind between poles of values with which we have built our society, but not something fundamental like joy or happiness, which can be unconditional. It's this lack of conditioning of these higher values which guide our lives that this is after. The same nerves that carry the sensations of misery carry also the sensations of happiness. The only way to stop evil, therefore, is to stop good also. There is no other way. To stop death, we shall also have to stop life. These are the opposites, good and bad. The mind being able to accept that, look, these are things that people call good, these are things that people call bad. But this is what they are in themselves. seeing them without our subjective conditioning. That's one. And then he jumps to the extreme case, life and death. We want to avoid death, it's not possible. Why? Because our system is built in such a way that accepting myself as alive today immediately leads to the conclusion that I will die someday. It's acceptance of these things and moving the mind out of this framework that leads to an understanding of what this means. And then the mind becomes detached from it. It becomes more and more tuned to this vast existence around us, in which this individual psychophysical organism, which we call this I, around which we build our vanities, that becomes relatively insignificant. That is what one is gunning towards. Life without death and happiness without misery are contradictions, and neither can be found alone, because each of them is but a different manifestation of the same thing, mind. He has made a statement here which we need to understand in our subjective existence. What does he mean to say that our happy experiences and our unhappy experiences emanate from the same thing? He is referring to some deep aspect of our being, which itself comes forth as happiness or unhappiness in terms of these polar opposites. It's this detached perspective which sees happiness and unhappiness as waves in our subjective consciousness that is being gunned at, that we are proceeding towards. What I thought to be good yesterday, I do not think to be good now. When I look back upon my life and see what were my ideals at different times, I find this to be so. At one time, my ideal was to drive a strong pair of horses. At another time, I thought if I could make a certain kind of sweetmeat, I should be perfectly happy. Later, I imagined that I should be entirely satisfied if I had a wife and children and plenty of money. Today, I laugh at all these ideals as mere childish nonsense. So we'll come back to this after a couple of weeks. With the next couple of weeks, I will not be here. So thank you very much. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.